Good evening and welcome to QTV today. We've got a great show lined up for you with wonderful stories. First off, we'll salute Marianne Fraser, an optimist both in life and in death. We'll head over to Vietnam for all the fun and excitement of Saigon Pride. Our special panel of experts will discuss the intricacies of the federal government's proposed Religious Freedoms Bill. And our Moments in Time series will remember Mandate Bar, the first 7 nights a week Q+ bar in St Kilda.
My friend Marianne Fraser was a great believer in past lives, in reincarnation. She herself had had many lives, as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, but also as a son, a husband and a brother, across many different cultures. She'd been rich, she'd been poor, and everything in between. She firmly believed that past lives help us in our present lives. They explain why we make the decisions we make, why we have certain impulses, why we do stupid things, why we do great things. She also said that it tells us about the partners we choose, sometimes wisely, sometimes unwisely. I used to stay with her every year. I gave a talk at the Gosford Theosophical Society, which she was the head, and I'd stay overnight with her and we'd talk, obviously, about life and about death, and how death doesn't really mean the end. It's just one of the many different events in the whole spectrum of events of the human soul. Last Tuesday, Marianne took a cup of tea into her bedroom with a book, lay down on the bed for a little bit of rest and never woke up. She literally dozed off. Marianne, I'd like to remember you for one particular thing. It was the day of the vote, result of the vote on same-sex marriage in Australia. And I said to her, I'm going to be on the train when the vote's announced. I'd love to be there when we hear one way or the other whether our relationships are legal and on an equal basis with other people. And she said, look, we've all been male, we've all been female, we've all been gay, we've all been straight, we've all been victims, we've all been victimizers, we've all been black, we've all been white, we've all been everything. And suddenly all the contention, all the duality, all just faded away with this belief system, which is after all believed by millions of people over the planet. The Hindus, the Jains, the Theosophists believe in reincarnation. So Marianne, all my best to you. I hope you won't have to come back. You did say it would be nice not to have any more lives, but you never can tell. But in this life, Marianne, you gave us a great deal, and we all love you. God bless, Marianne.
Next up, we've got Saigon Pride.
Hey guys, I'm here about to head out to the 7th annual Vietnam Pride. Hey! Although it's kind of unofficial because we're not really allowed to have a mass gathering here in Vietnam, so it's kind of on a down low. Actually, the US Embassy just said that it discouraged people from going on a Pride walk, but going to the after parties was totally okay. However, still headed to the Pride walk. Gonna go check it out and see what happens. Yay, Gay Pride Vietnam. We decided to meet up with some friends at the newest edition of the queer bars in Saigon called the Tipsy Unicorn. Although Saigon has a population of about 9 million people, there's still only a handful of openly queer spaces. After a couple of drinks, it was time to head to Nguyen Hue Street, also known as Walking Street. It is one of Saigon's most historic sites, centrally located in the city. Attendees gathered around to dance, snap pictures, and march up and down the street carrying a huge gay flag.
Hi, bao nhiêu lâu chưa gặp. Năm nay 25 hay 30, 35. 30 hay su boy, this is ai nói giấc mơ đã chết khi ta qua 25. Ta đâu quá buồn tâm. Feeling myself như phụ nữ của năm. I'm really really hot, mày gặp beat 500. Hay mà flow như Melissa. Em super duper fly như má tôi Missy. Nhịp tim phải thoát cho em ít oxy. Hip thì phải hop, chỉ có nhất không có nhì. Anh muốn hôn đôi môi em whisky tasty. Nếu chỉ mainstream hay là under. Đời này quá hẹp con nương tựa nhà thờ. Phát ván cờ này chỉ có freedom mà thôi. Tên tôi là su boy, đưa thế giới bằng vào nồi. Những thứ kia không rơi xuống đây như cho không. Thế giới này như sương mai bay.
Although the government seems in no rush to push for equality, Vietnamese citizens' acceptance on the LGBTQ community is expanding, especially among the younger generation. As with any Pride March these days, corporations were also in attendance to show their support for the community. Torrential downpours sent me home for a bit to rest and get ready for the late-night party happening at Arkin. Gender Funk is a party series aiming to create safe spaces to express gender and sexuality. They throw monthly parties which include games and a slew of drag performances, usually focused on local talents. However, since this was a special event, they even hosted drag talent from neighboring Cambodia. I had the opportunity to speak with Nisine. She's a local drag queen originally from Saigon, but who has also lived in Hanoi for several years. We spoke on her thoughts about the Pride celebration in the North Vietnam as opposed to the South. Is there a difference between Pride in Saigon and Hanoi?
I would say that Pride in Saigon is a bit more pink washed, but we're also trying to get past that, so it's a good thing. I think Pride in Hanoi has more of a organic feel to it, and you see people being genuinely happy to celebrate that, whereas the more often than not the case of Pride or Pride Month in Saigon is more about sales or like buying and selling rainbow shit. So,
is that what you mean by pink wash?
Yes.
I was also doubling as one of the DJs of the night, but once my set was finished, I was able to catch up with some of the volunteers and organizers. John Mark is originally from America, but he has been an organizer for Gender Funk for the last couple of years. I wanted to get his thoughts on how he has seen Pride change.
For last year's Pride, do you feel like how is this any different from last year?
Last year was similar. Last year was like the first Pride that I feel like was really big, had a lot of people showing up. So I feel like last year sort of set the tone for how Pride is going to grow. It was sort of like the starting point, it felt like. So I think this year was a little bit bigger. There were a little more people. We raised a lot of money for charity at this event tonight, which is really exciting. So I think it's just going to keep growing every year.
Anything else you would like to say about Pride or Gender Funk? LGBT community?
Oh my God. Tôi yêu cộng đồng LGBT Việt Nam. That's it.
I also spoke with Hang Lê, a volunteer for Gender Funk, on Vietnam's shifting attitudes on the LGBTQ community.
Do you think that Vietnam will actually ever change
Yes.
its laws?
Yes. So like my experience when I was young, like 10 years ago, people would think that homosexuality is like a disease, a communicable disease that you would catch. You should stay away from gay people. But now people don't think it's like that anymore. And then Just a few years ago, I heard a story from the Mekong Delta where two guys tried to get married and the authority tried to break them up. And then 2 years later, gay marriage got decriminalized. It's not like legal, but it's not illegal either. Like it's making some small steps. It's actually like help the community a lot. There's a lot of gay group that's actually like lobbying the government, everything like that, and it's making small steps. We don't need to have something like substantial to happen. It's just a small step, and then we will see some goal eventually.
After a long day of drinking, dancing, DJing, and volunteering, it was time to head back home the quickest way possible, which is by hopping on a motorbike taxi. Thank you so much for watching. This is Eduardo Culbo. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and love you for watching. Thanks.
Coming up next, we'll take a look at the panel discussion on Joy 94.9's Saturday Magazine programme. And then we're going to remember Mandate Bar.
Do we need to have a religious discrimination bill in Australia?
It is important to protect religious freedom at the federal level, and so we would support protecting people against discrimination on the basis of their religious beliefs and activities at the federal level, just like we do at the state level. I suppose our position is, though, that this religious discrimination bill takes it further than what's usual in relation to discrimination provisions.
This bill deviates from traditional anti-discrimination legislation and starts to create a whole range of problems in terms of protecting others from discrimination.
We definitely don't need this bill. We support protections for people of faith, and we know that there are people in this country who are, discriminated against because of their religion. This bill, as Liam said, isn't going about it the right way. It takes it way too far. There's no balancing mechanisms in it that make the bill sort of better for everyone. Religious protections for people should never come at the expense of others. And the way that this bill privileges religious opinions and religious belief over other human rights and other beliefs isn't the right way to do it.
It's really important that there are protections for people of faith, and certainly religious minority groups are experiencing discrimination in our country and have been calling out, for example, for better vilification protections. But this bill actually doesn't provide vilification protections. What it is a bill that privileges rights for some at the cost of others.
It doesn't fit very well with the current architecture that we have around anti-discrimination legislation and human rights legislation nationally or at a state level.
This bill is sort of going back to that idea of a promise to the people who voted no, that we were going to protect you and your rights.
For some religious minority groups, like the Muslim communities and Muslim women, this law isn't necessarily protecting them, and they are experiencing really awful hate speech and violence.
There isn't a lot of evidence of people being discriminated on the basis of religion, save and except the minority groups that we just discussed there. What is motivating the government to do this?
Normally, discrimination law at the state and federal level is complementary, and it's a good suite of complementary laws that provides protection for everyone, whereas this bill tries to override some of the existing state protections, for example, for LGBTIQ communities. And so to that extent, it's out of whack. It also expands existing exemptions for religious bodies when it comes to discrimination. Normally, discrimination in human rights law applies to people, whereas here, religious bodies also can claim discrimination.
This bill starts off like a traditional anti-discrimination statute, but then it essentially converts to a Bill of Rights, and it starts to create these sort of positive rights for people of faith to do things that would otherwise be constrained against discrimination of other people. So I think, when we think about how this bill deviates, I think if the government was bringing forward a traditional anti-discrimination bill that protect religion as a personal attribute, then I think a lot of people would find that okay. This deviates pretty substantially.
It seems to me from this discussion that the bill is starting from the wrong place. It's a response to a perceived a public policy debate where one group didn't win it and they feel like they weren't listened to and therefore they feel like their rights have been transgressed.
Protecting people who express statements, sincere statements of belief in their workplace, in schools, sort of everywhere. And if we think about what those expressions might look like, something like a teacher saying to a child of same-sex couple that you should go and pray for forgiveness or your family are sinners, that kind of thing. Imagine a doctor saying that homosexuality is a sin, those kinds of statements that really are and speak to mental health issues in our community, but also if we go further and think about the doctor example, what that looks like for healthcare, because judgment-free healthcare is an important part of seeking treatment. If you're going to see a doctor, you want them to make sure that you feel safe with them, that they're not going to judge you. It's going to be really hard for them to do anything about those doctors, and it's really difficult for employers to make inclusive workplaces. So even if you're trying to have a policy that protects everyone, regardless of who they are, where they live and whom they love, it's really, really difficult for those people to make sure that everyone feels safe under this bill.
Employers can no longer create the sort of safe and inclusive workplaces that they previously would have been able to. Doctors, for example, would be able to conscientiously object if their religious beliefs indicated to them that that's not a service that could be provided. But that would, I guess, extend beyond the LGBT community as well, because it could also be a woman seeking an abortion. It could, an information in relation to that. There's a range of circumstances. Trans people wanting to seek services, with beliefs that might conflict with a doctor believing that, God says that you either have to be a he or a she, and so therefore may not provide the services.
It goes beyond the LGBTIQ community. So you might have a family with a child with a disability, and you might have a health practitioner say, and you can tell me if this is protected under the Act, but say something like, well, you've failed or you've sinned and that's why your child has a disability.
This bill protects things like a disability support worker saying to someone your disability is caused by sin.
Far-reaching implications for members of our community who are HIV positive, for example, and so we know stigma has been a major issue and barrier to access of service, but also to safe behaviour.
There was a doctor in Torquay that had a sign up saying that they wouldn't do contraceptive services, things like that, about sexual and reproductive health recently. And people just say, well, go to someone else, go to a more inclusive provider, which is all well and good. But if you're in a country town, if there are a few pharmacists, there are a few doctors, you don't have those options. The original intention of this bill, which I genuinely believe to be a promise to people who voted no in the marriage equality plebiscite, to get some kind of revenge in law, really.
This definitely does feel like it's a settle up, whether it be drawn back to marriage equality, the Israel Folau saga that played out last year. Really, the rubber hits the road in the workplace. The workplace is often where anti-discrimination law really gets tested. Employers have been clear the statement of belief provisions are unworkable. They will actually entrench disharmony in workplaces, and they actually are irreconcilable with their obligations to provide a healthy and safe workplace. The statement of belief provisions essentially will create a set of rights for people of faith to manifest their faith in ways that would otherwise infringe on others' rights to a safe workplace. This bill explicitly provides to religious institutions the right to discriminate against somebody on the basis of their religion, create conflict in workplaces between workers, but indeed, as we pointed out before, it creates real complicated problems for employers who are providing a service and not knowing, quite frankly, whether they can require that service to be provided by some employees. And actually, I fear that it could lead to some discrimination of people of faith because employers could be wary about taking people of faith on.
We've been trying to encourage employers to create, healthy and safe and inclusive workplaces, and this hampers their ability to do that.
A lot of these bodies receive public funding to provide absolutely essential services like homelessness services, family violence services, health services, things that Australians rely on every day and incredibly vulnerable Australians rely on every day. And religious bodies are being given a licence to discriminate in terms of who they provide those services to.
Because this bill privileges religious freedom over other human rights, the balance isn't correct.
This is a bill that will absolutely encourage litigation, and those bodies that are well resourced and have money will benefit.
I would have thought the premise of any anti-discrimination legislation is really to try and prevent harm and to talk about the harm that's caused to somebody.
Well, this is going to generate it, isn't it?
I don't use the word religious freedom. I don't think that is the right frame. I think absolutely we should talk about religious discrimination, and that should be the objective of our anti-discrimination laws, and including this bill. Religious freedom starts to talk about the freedom of a range of rights that people should have. And I talked before about, realistically what the government is trying to do here is create an anti-discrimination statute and then convert the back end of it to a Bill of Rights. Now, if the government want to talk about a Bill of Rights, and some members of the government are now starting to talk about a Bill of Rights, then I think from our movement's perspective, we're up for a discussion around a Bill of Rights.
Melbourne's camps have been gathering and socialising in pubs since at least the 1930s, usually in a fairly discreet sort of way. That started to change in the 70s. The big breakthrough came in 1980 when Ken Payne returned from overseas, inspired by what he'd seen there in terms of gay life. He established Mandate here on Carlisle Street in St Kilda, with its 6 nights a week, all gay staff, all gay owned venue for gay men. There were those who predicted that it wouldn't last. Melbourne, after all, wasn't San Francisco or New York or even Sydney. Among those who hoped it wouldn't last was the local council. Ken found himself in court 8 times in the first year, defending his right to operate a bar like this. The crowds responded very differently. The place was usually pretty packed. Mandate had a very masculine look. The original decoration was mostly a sort of prism motif, but it was also celebrate national holidays like Australia Day with seas of eucalyptus leaves and flags, and there were big events, special events for things like Melbourne Cup Eve. In private, some remember Maggot Alley down the back, where many a heart was broken. Unlike many of the make-a-quick-buck entrepreneurs, Ken and his colleagues were committed to making this an attractive and interesting place to be, and they changed the decor really frequently. Changing the decor was usually an expensive process. It involved upgrading the light and sound systems, expanding the dance floors, and so on. Over the time of its existence, Mandate took many different looks, and if patrons were expected to pay for this, paying up to $4.50 for a shot of liquor, that was just part of the price they were prepared to pay for the interesting, stimulating, big night out that Mandate offered. In the end, after a decade, Ken moved on, trying his hand at new opportunities.
Wasn't it great to take a look back at Mandate Bar? And can you believe they were open for 7 nights a week? If only Melbourne had lots of venues going like that for our community today. But there we go. That's it for us from QTV for tonight. Join me again next week for some more QTV.
Hey,